4 continents. He has been ambassador or high commissioner to Germany, to Singapore, to South Africa and Kenya. He also served as the head of the division in the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, responsible for managing Australia's relations with the United States during the Trump presidency. His career includes many highlights, such as lead responsibility for the development of Australia's policy on the Quad from 2017 to 2019, piloting the conclusion of the enhanced strategic partnership with Germany and the Australia-Germany Hydrogen Accord in 2021. He was also Prime Minister Kevin Rudd's international advisor between 2009 and 2010. Alex Ellis. Alex is the British High Commissioner to the Republic of India, bringing a wealth of experience in security, EU affairs and strategy. Previously, he served as the Deputy National Security Advisor in the UK for the Integrated Review on Foreign and Security Policy, as well as the Director General in the Department for Exiting the EU. His roles include overseeing the UK-EU security partnership, international agreements, and engagements on Brexit. His diplomatic career also spans such key positions as British Ambassador to Brazil and to Portugal, Deputy of Strategy in the Foreign Office, and a member of the Cabinet of the President of the European Commission. May Elin Steiner. May Elin is currently the Ambassador of Norway to India. Since 2020, she has been Deputy Director General of the Regional Department in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Norway, covering Africa, Asia, Latin America, and the Middle East. She has worked for the Norwegian Foreign Service since 1995 and has also been posted to the UN offices in Geneva. Jeff Goodell, who you may have seen earlier today on this stage. Jeff's latest book is the New York Times bestseller, The Heat Will Kill You First, Life and Death on a Scorched Planet. He's the author of 6 previous books, including The Water Will Come, Rising Seas, Sinking Cities, and the remaking of The Civilized World. Sumant Sinha is the founder, chairman and CEO of Renew, the first Indian clean energy company listed on NASDAQ. A global entrepreneur and climate thought leader, he has driven Renew to a portfolio of 13.8 GW, offering comprehensive decarbonization solutions. He has been recognized for his climate advocacy, serving on global boards and receiving accolades, including the 2022 USISPF Global Leadership Award. And leading the conversation tonight, I'm delighted to say, is Shyam Saran. Shyam Saran is a former Foreign Secretary of India and Prime Minister's Special Envoy for Nuclear Affairs and Climate Change. He was chairman of the National Security Advisory Board from 2013 to 2015, and he is currently president of the India International Centre. He is the author of How India Sees the World and How China Sees India and the World. And before I hand over to Shyam, I just mention that books will be signed afterwards in the book booth outside. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very much, and warm welcome to all the very distinguished members of our panel. Before I start this session, let me just give you a little background to the global stock take. This was presented in September 2023 in advance of the COP28, which was a climate summit which took place later in November, December last year. First of all, let me try to explain to you one very important concept, which is that of global net zero, which is the target that we have for the year 2050 for most countries. It is 2060 for China, and India itself has announced that it will achieve net zero by 2070. Now, the thing to know about net zero is that it is a balance sheet concept. It is not zero emissions. It is emissions that you will have in 2050 or 2060 or 70, which will be balanced by reductions of carbon in the atmosphere through global sinks or through some, technological marvel by that time. Global sinks are, for example, in the oceans of the world, they are the forests of the world. So if we are talking about any matching reductions, then we have to be also mindful of the fact that if our forests are getting cut at the rate at which they are, and the oceans are getting polluted at the rate at we are, then the global sink may not really be available when we need it. So just keep that in mind. What did the global stocktake show? What it showed was that, if we take into account all the various nationally determined contributions or commitments which have been made by parties to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, then even if they were all implemented, we are actually on track to 2.7 degrees centigrade average rise in global temperature by the end of the century. So forget about 1.5, maybe not even 2.0 centigrade, which is supposed to be the real limit threshold, beyond which there may be catastrophic, irreversible consequences as far as the world's climate is concerned. So we are not on track. That is something that we have to recognize. And one of the heads of the World Resource Institute said, what does the global stocktake show? That carbon emissions are still climbing, that rich countries' finance commitments are delinquent, and as far as adaptation is concerned or support is concerned, they are lagging woefully behind. So that is where we are at this point of time. Good news at the COP28 was that for the first time, it was agreed that if we want to really win the war against the climate change, then it is necessary to make a shift, make a transition from our current reliance on fossil fuels like coal, oil, gas, to a pattern of economic activity which must be based mostly on renewable sources of energy and cleaner sources of energy, for example, nuclear energy. That transition has now been accepted, that this is inevitable and this is indispensable. So it is in that context that I will ask our various panelists to tell us from their perspective where we are and how far we have to go. By the way, we have here 6 sayers and 1 doer. So, this is... So let us start the ball rolling. Let me begin by posing some questions to our ambassador from Norway. Now, Norway, as far as I can see, has 2 parallel stories on climate change. One, it has been and wishes to be a world leader as far as global action on climate change is concerned. I had the privilege of working together with Erik Solheim when I was doing climate change work, and really there is a great deal of drive and enthusiasm with which Norway approaches this particular global challenge. But the second thing is that Norway is also a major producer of oil and gas and is actively engaged in expanding the exploration and production of fossil fuels. Okay? So how do you propose to deal with this duality in the light of the global stocktake and the decisions on transitioning away from fossil fuels? 5 minutes.
Thank you so very much, Shyam, for that question. I also think, I'm quite new ambassador of Norway here in India, and I've been invited to so many places where exactly the energy transition is the theme, and that we need to discuss that. So exactly this is very good. There is a duality, apparently, with Norway. I understand your question very well. But let me say, we are quite a small country, but we are an energy superpower. That stems from that we found oil in around 1970 in the North Sea. But also, let me say that internally in Norway, energy and electricity comes from almost 100% renewable power from hydropower. And it has done so for 100 years. And this is an experience that we are using in this region of South Asia and also other places in the world. We are also conscious of our responsibility, having been an oil and gas and still being oil and gas producer. It is not totally right that we are still, actively exploring, but we are managing, and we have to manage also for the energy of the world. But we are trying to use the expertise that we have been getting as an offshore producer, to use that also for renewable energy and developing of renewables. Just to mention an example, the offshore technology that we now need to develop wind energy and solar offshore is exactly the same as we can use also that we have knowledge from oil and gas. And we are using it in Norway, and we are developing the renewables, and we're putting quite a lot of our energy into that. I have a lot more to say, but you can, of course, stop me. There are others in the panel.
I just wanted to interject and say it is very laudable what you are trying to do in terms of developing hydroelectric power resources, a clean source of power. It is also worth noting that you are using some of the technology that you have for oil exploration, particularly offshore, to develop, for example, offshore wind power. Still, the question remains that we have committed ourselves to, at COP28, to transition away from fossil fuels to using more and more renewable energy and clean sources of energy. Now, in the context of that particular goal, what we see Norway doing in terms of further exploration and expansion of its oil and gas resources, isn't there a contradiction, and how do you resolve this contradiction?
Well, they can appear as a contradiction, as I said, but I would like to say that Norway is firmly on the goal, and we are firmly on the goal of net zero by 2050. And we are putting in a lot of resources for the energy transition. And we are not anymore doing anything to help other countries on developing their oil and gas resources. We are trying to transition ours to renewables, and we are also helping other countries to do that. And therefore, financing is a big part of this. And our goal has been to double our commitment to finance the energy transition between 21 and 26. We have already reached that goal. So we are working on that.
Okay, so we have a good picture of what Norway is trying to do in order to transition away from fossil fuels. I hope it is more accelerated than perhaps it is at this point of time, but I think more power to your elbow. Let me turn to Alex now. As far as the UK is concerned, in fact, during the time that I was involved in climate change negotiations, the UK was always seen as a kind of advance guard, as a leader as far as dealing with climate change is concerned. A whole slew of policies which were adopted by the UK in really to make that transition away from fossil fuels. It seems that that particular phase of the UK being even an advance of even the European Union as far as climate change is concerned, that phase seems to be faltering somewhat. There have been some recent, decisions which have been taken, which some people have been saying that actually the UK seems to be moving backwards. Take, for example, the target for the adoption of electric vehicles. not allowing further use of petrol and diesel cars beyond, I think, 2035, if I'm not mistaken. You have also, with respect to transportation, public transportation, the railway line, which was touted as a very good example of how the UK is trying to promote public transportation in favor, instead of private vehicular traffic. That very major project has been given up recently, and perhaps much of the investment will now go into highways again. Is the UK falling behind?
Hello, everyone. I think others are catching up, which is a great thing. The UK has halved its emissions per head since 1990, one of the furthest of any country in the world. We're the 6th biggest economy, we're the 17th biggest emitter. So there's a great story. And now you're into the hard stuff, yeah? A lot of what's happened till now has not really come into domestic politics in such a big way, and now it does. The German coalition almost collapsed over the debate about boilers, if I remember rightly. These are very big domestic issues. So what's interesting is you're getting to the really hard yards now. The UK has a target of reducing its emissions by 68% by 2030, I think. That's very hard. And the Prime Minister would say you have to carry people with you. The government has, and can I just a sidetrack. Governments are doers in this area or not doers. It is really important. You will never achieve what we need to achieve without governments. The private sector are the great deliverers, but the governments set the rules. I've worked on climate change for 20 years, so I worked in the European Commission on it. You need to create the policy frameworks within which private capital can move and make decisions. If there are no rules, there isn't a hope in hell of getting anywhere near 1.5 or 2%. It's really important to remember that. So, the fact is, the climate change affects every human on Earth, and every creature on Earth, I would say, as well. So, it is, by definition, going to have consequences for every person, and every person will respond to it. So, when you get inside the home with policies, like your boiler, what car you can buy, this is a big deal. Now, the UK is delayed till 2035, the ending of the sale of new diesel and petrol cars. That puts it in line with such environmental catastrophes such as the Netherlands or Denmark. It's the same rule. So let's not worry too much about that, I think. But how do you do diplomacy on such an issue like this? And I think, just look at it from a diplomat's point of view, one of the extraordinary things is that climate change is still genuinely negotiated amongst every country in the world. This is odd, because there are only 3 countries in the world which truly matter for climate change. China, the United States, and India. They produce more than 50% of all the greenhouse gas emissions of the world, about 50% at the moment. That will grow. And yet, the whole world negotiates it. And it's one of the very, very few negotiations I've come across where the very small countries have a loud voice because of the consequences of climate change. And I think that's a great thing.
Yeah. Well, let me just clarify. You mentioned the 3 countries which are absolutely critical to dealing with the challenge of climate change. China, far ahead, almost 1/3 of the global emissions. The United States, maybe 1/4. India, only 7%. So don't please put us in the same category as the other. The other point I would like to make is, we again go back to the global stocktake, and I pose the question to the ambassador from Norway as how do you reconcile the further exploration and the production of oil and gas in a period where you are supposed to be transitioning away from it. You shared the North Sea with Norway, and I think now you have a policy of max out as far as oil exploration and production is concerned. Again, I pose to you the same question. How do you deal with that contradiction?
One of the oddities, by the way, of this policy area is India is on the cusp of this incredible development. So it's not in the same state as China, but nevertheless, there are only 3 countries in the world which emit more than 5% of the world's emissions because of their population. The UK is less than 1%, so you kind of have to remember that. So there are really 3, whenever in policy making, I think very rarely are there binary choices. There are usually 3. Most policy making on climate change tries to do essentially to sit within a triangle between kind of affordability, so economics, security, and sustainability. And everyone sits within that triangle. Now, what the Russian invasion of Ukraine has done is to nudge a lot of countries a bit further towards the security part. That's true in India. And now the great answer, which is, let's do more renewables. But it's not the only answer, unfortunately. Everyone is trying a little bit more security. So the UK says, okay, within that triangle, we move a little bit more that way. Now, the UK will still go to net zero. It has a law. It's halfway there, which is an amazing achievement. As I say, we're now in the tough bits. And they would argue, I think the Prime Minister would say, you're still going to be using carbon in 2050, but you are, as it were, offsetting it to get to net zero. So that would be the argument. You have to have a bit more security. How do you reconcile that with sustainability? That is the big question.
Okay. As I said, the issue that we have to keep our minds focused on is that net zero is not zero. And you have to have, ways in which you can actually compensate for whatever emissions still remain in 2050, 2060, 2070. So that is something that all of us should keep in mind, that we are making assumptions which may not always be very realistic. The EU has been a pace setter, in climate change action. There is a European Union climate law, which gives legal force to the goal of global net zero by 2050. It has also set an intermediate target of reducing net greenhouse gas emissions by as much as 55% by 2030 compared to 1990 levels. Additionally, there is a plan to increase carbon sinks in the shape of forests, for example, by another 15% by 2030. And the EU also runs the world's first major carbon market or emissions trading system, which currently covers something like 40% of total EU emissions. There are two issues that I would like to raise to you, Ambassador. One is that as a result of the energy crisis, and Alex referred to it, triggered by the disruption of the supplies of Russian piped gas in the wake of the Ukraine war, there are signs of some reversal on climate action. For example, there is considerable new investment being directed towards alternate gas supply infrastructure, including for the import of LNG, for example, from the US and from the Middle East. There are fears that this is likely to lock Europe into longer-term dependency on fossil gas. This may run again counter to the transition that is foreseen in COP21. What is your comment on this?
Thank you, Shyam, for your questions. Let me first maybe bounce back on your point about the war against climate change. I mean, it is a war that we are fueling literally ourselves. And let me react first as a citizen of this planet. I mean, we are really off track with the GTS, the global stack, with a 2.7 increase in the global temperature. I mean, this is a wrong trajectory heading towards a tragedy. The sea level will rise by 2 meters. This is the most conservative. And what this means is about 1 billion population will be exposed, particularly in South Asia. And this is the most conservative. It could be 3 meters. So this is something which is very much a climate cluster bomb that we are facing, and we somehow stick still our heads into the sand. Now, on your question, because that brings me to one of the points that Alex mentioned. There is other bombs, the bombs that Russia threw on Ukraine. That really disrupted the energy market, but that created opportunities. We have really phased out from our over-dependency on Russian gas from 45%, now we're 7%. I think we're done in a matter of 2 years. Therefore, LNG has been our security in the short run. We import from Norway, Algeria, and US mostly. That doesn't mean we are drifting from our targets. actually we've met all our targets. We are overshooting our targets in terms of renewables, in terms of a carbon reduction. And on top, making I would say a curse, an opportunity, these LNG facilities, they are built and designed in such a way that it will allow also hydrogen and ammonia in the future. So we are not building or overbuilding a dependency. So what we see net here is that Putin trying to weaponize oil and gas, and he has seriously miscalculated. And we should even thank him, it has accelerated. So for us, it's fine, and we have kept our track.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I have another very important question, particularly as far as an Indian audience is concerned, and that is the EU's carbon border adjustment mechanism, which is being implemented in its transitional phase already. This is justified by the European Union in order to prevent so-called carbon leakage, that is possible relocation of EU industry from less carbon-intensive EU to more carbon-intensive countries, which could be India as well. How do you respond to the criticism that the CBAM, that is the Border Adjustment Mechanism, is a unilateral measure, not negotiated under WTO? It has gone against the approach of using multilateralism in order to deal with the issue of climate change. It violates the UNFCCC principle of common but differentiated responsibility and respective capabilities, the CBDR principle, because it discriminates, it is argued, against developing countries, being a patently protectionist measure, as it has been mentioned. Now, at a time where neither financial resources nor technological resources are being deployed in the developing countries to help them with their climate action, is this measure a fair measure? A quick answer.
Yeah, well, first, I mean, this is probably where the CBAM, I mean, sorry, it's very technical, and I apologize for this. I mean, we are trying to make sense of something which is utterly technical. But it is everything, but it's certainly not a protectionist instrument. It helps to accelerate the decarbonization of industry. We cannot, at the one time, having the emission trading system that our companies have to comply with, while imports into Europe can have a lot of carbon leakage, first. Second, it's not applicable to countries, it's applicable to sectors and to companies that import in Europe highly carbonized products, steel, aluminum, and so on and so forth. We have designed a system with a transition period. It is not yet in place, it's a transition. It's over years. And during these transitions, we are informing ourselves about the impact this will have, notably in developing countries. And so we are not penalizing anyone. We're just saying this is the way to go, together with ETS. And if the countries are applying an ETS system themselves, it will be offset from the CBAM. So it is an encouragement, and we are trailblazing. So maybe we can be criticized being ahead of the curve, but I think others will follow. And on the last point, sorry, in terms of financing, I think the EU should not be shy about its achievements. In terms of climate financing, the EU alone has provided 30% of the global target of 100 billion for climate change. We are investing in renewables in other countries. So we take the slack, even we're trailblazing in that area, but I think the EU has been showing the way. We see that ETS and even CBAM is considered by other countries, which shows that it's probably the evolution. And what I see is also the private sector is reacting positively to that in some ways. So of course there are vested interests, of course it will create resistance, but honestly, do we have the choice? We don't.
Well, we'll have to wait and see how this goes with figures, particularly in the India-EU trade negotiations which are taking place at the moment for a free trade agreement. I'm not quite sure where this will fit in, but let's hope for the best. Australia, a resource-rich country, relies heavily on the export of mineral and fossil fuels such as coal. It has committed itself, of course, to net zero, like many other countries, by 2050. maybe the pathway to that goal is not quite clear to people outside. There is some concern that the achievement of targets appear to rely more heavily on offsets rather than in ambitious domestic emission reductions. Your take on this?
Well, I don't think our achievement of our targets is particularly reliant on offsets. It's true that we have a very heavy reliance on carbon. It's true that we have about the largest coal reserves in the planet. But we are making a huge effort, and in fact, the fastest effort in terms of transforming the grid than any of the group on this panel. So just a short while ago, our reliance for our grid was 90% fossil fuel. By 2030, just now 6 years' time away, we will be 82% renewable in the grid. Now, how's that possible? You're absolutely right. There's a lot of fossil capability in our country, but we have a couple of other advantages. We have a lot of sun. We have relatively low population and relatively low industrial intensivity. And we have good persistent wind in the evening. So Australia's a great place to make renewables. And that's why we're confident that we will be able by 2030 to be 80%, 82% reliant on renewables in our grid. But there's a couple of other things that you might not know.
Quickly.
Very quickly. So you might think of us as a fun-loving, cricket-playing nation that relies heavily on metals and materials, right?
We have no problem with that.
On a short list of the areas in science where we are truly at global class is renewables. So it might surprise you to know that 85% of all solar panels that are made on the globe at the moment are made with the Australian technology. And it may surprise you to know that Australia has as many patents on renewable energy as does Germany or the United States. And the third thing I want to mention, and Maylan said it, but it's really important, we will be building renewable capability at gigascale, and it helps that our economy is very used to big infrastructure projects, be they in mining or be they in LNG.
Okay. Thank you. Let me turn to the one doer, as I said, amongst us. Sumant is a pioneer in expanding India's renewable energy capacity. Since founding his renewable energy company, Renew, in 2011, he has overseen renewable energy installed capacity to go from 0 to almost 6,000 megawatts in just about 6 years. He has written an inspiring book, which I would highly recommend to all of you, Fossil-Free, Reimagining Clean Energy in a Carbon-Constrained World. So, as far as your achievements are concerned, compliments, congratulations on what you have been able to achieve. It's a truly inspiring story. You have also looked at the outcome of the COP28, and once again, the very important promise to move from fossil fuels to renewable and clean sources of energy to which you are contributing. You have drawn attention to, as far as the Indian experience is concerned, to two possible constraints that we may face. One is space, because solar energy requires a lot of open space. And the other is, storage. And the fact that a lot of the storage capacity and technology is dependent upon a very different kind of supply chain, which is also challenging as the one that we are trying to leave behind. Very short, how do you propose to deal with this?
Okay, thank you. Well, first of all, I would say that all the ambassadors here have given very robust defenses of their countries' various actions and strategies, which is terrific, of course. But the reality is that if you add up all the commitments that we have globally, as you said, we are heading to 2.7 degrees. And mind you, those are only commitments. Action is much further behind. Nobody really is monitoring a lot of the action. And we are clearly not on track, anywhere close to getting even to 2.7 degrees. So I think there is really a big gap between where we need to get to and the direction that we are going in right now. The second thing I would say is that people are looking at their scope 1 and scope 2 emissions, but very few countries are looking at their scope 3 emissions. For example, if Australia exports coal, that is going to be burned somewhere, and it is going to emit carbon into the atmosphere. And similarly, the question that you asked about Norway as well. So countries are loath to move away from what is commercially sensible for them, even though it might be leading to more carbon emissions elsewhere in the world. But be that as it may, I think the question that you asked about the issue of storage and about land, those are in fact constraining factors very clearly, and India does not have a lot of extra land. So we have to make the best use of it that we can. I think as technologies evolve and the amount of land required becomes smaller, that will certainly help in making things more dense. But certainly the amount of land required is still going to be a lot. The good thing is that places like Rajasthan, the state that we're in right now, have both very good solar radiation and a lot of barren land, where we can actually, if you look at it, set up as much solar capacity as is required to power all of India, without using up all the land that is available. The only thing is we need to build transmission infrastructure. So it's not just a question of land, it's also building the transmission to take all this power out and move it into all the different parts of the country. So it's really a bit of both that we have to do. And then we have to look at offshore wind as well, where we don't actually use land, but we put up, for example, off the coast of Gujarat or off the coast of Tamil Nadu, where there is good wind. And this is something that various countries have already demonstrated around the world. We can actually, use a lot of the offshore wind capability. So I think the land issue can be addressed. As far as storage is concerned, look, there is a lot of technology development that is happening on batteries, and I'm therefore pretty convinced that all of that is going to result in solutions becoming available. We are already pioneering a lot of different things like round-the-clock power solutions and so on, which actually require less batteries as well. So we are actually being quite at the forefront of finding those solutions.
Okay, so more power to your elbow, because I think this is certainly very important component of how we as India make that transition. And the more success that we have, that is a much greater contribution to the global effort as well. Jeff, finally to you. You have been a climate warrior for a couple of decades now and have written some truly outstanding books on the peril our planet faces. You have, in the latest of the two books you have written, both bestsellers, Water Will Come On, Rising Seas, and also The Heat Will Kill You First, Life and Death on a Scorched Planet. I was particularly struck by your observation that the phase global warming is a rather gentle phase. It obfuscates the seriousness of the threat we face from rising temperatures. 2023 was the hottest year on record, fully 1.09 centigrades higher than the pre-industrial age. In the 2000 interview that you gave to NPR, you had said, so far we have shown absolutely no political will to actually cut CO2 emissions. You know, we have been talking about global warming in a serious way for some 30 years, and by the only measure that matters is the amount of CO2 that is going into the atmosphere, we are not doing anything. We have a lot to talk about clean energy. People are trying to do their part, change their lives in small ways, but in fact, we are really not doing anything. So, two questions to you. What you said in 2011 to NPR. Has really anything changed for the better? One question.
I can see that we're running out of time, which is a good analogy for the whole conversation of what we're talking about here, so I will be very brief. It's certainly not true that we're not doing anything. I mean, obviously, we've heard a lot about what's going on. The economics of energy have changed dramatically in the last decade. But I just want to make two brief points. One is, at this last COP, it was the first time the phrase fossil fuels have been mentioned in 40 years of discussion about this. And the other point is what I mentioned in that quote, is that when the only metric that really matters when we think about this transition and the consequences of a warming planet is the levels of CO2 in the atmosphere, and that is just continuing to rise. So yes, there's been a lot of improvements in energy, cheaper energy, renewable energy, but we have not done a very good job of getting ourselves off of fossil fuels. There's still enormous subsidies in that. We have not shown the political will to really wean ourselves off of this as quickly as we need to, and we need to think very seriously and more aggressively about what it's going to be like to live on a hotter planet.
Yeah. Last question, quickly. In 2011, you also mentioned that maybe we can look at geoengineering as a possible, solution. Given the risk that we now know that geoengineering does entail, and the fact that actually there are much simpler solutions available for dealing with climate change, do you still feel that geoengineering is something we should look at quickly?
So geoengineering is sort of a bad idea whose time has come. Geoengineering, just quickly for those who don't know what it is, we're talking about solar engineering, which is spraying particles in the stratosphere, kind of making what amounts to artificial volcanoes, which reflect away a little sunlight and cool the planet. It's relatively easy to do with high altitude aircraft, things like that. I do not endorse this. I am not suggesting it's a good idea at all, but our failure to really deal with reductions of emissions over time have meant that these kinds of desperate and dangerous solutions are going to become more and more upfront and more part of the conversation. My own view is that we need to take the science more seriously. We need to do more serious research so we know the risks better. So that I do think it's inevitable that someone or some nation will do this. And the more we understand about the risks and dangers, the better.
Well, I hope we understand the risks because it does appear to me that it's an idea whose time should never come. That's what I would think. By the way, this is your tweet.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Charge zone. I think this is in India, and you have. Was this on a note of optimism or pessimism?
Well, optimism, but then the more I thought about it, so this is a picture of a charging station when I arrived in Jaipur.
A charging station that he had photographed.
Just quickly to explain, I arrived in Jaipur my first time here. I got to my hotel at night, woke up in the morning, opened my windows. First thing I saw was an electric charging station right out my window. And I thought that was just fabulous, so I took a picture of it and tweeted. But the less fabulous part of it is I've been here 4 days now. I have yet to see a car in the charging station.
Okay, on that note, we'll just get to, we have 3 minutes. So question and answer, yes, the lady there, please.
Thank you so much.
Quick question, please.
Yes, to all panelists. What about agriculture? We hear about transport and energy needs, but we don't hear about agriculture. Agriculture is a huge emitter of greenhouse gases, including nitrous oxide.
Okay, agriculture. Anybody here? Yes? The lady there? Come on. Yeah, please, get up.
I just wanted to know if a huge solar flare hits, will any of this be useful?
A
yes? Solar flare, like a CME hits us. Will any of this be useful?
Okay. Yes? Here, there, please. Yeah, quickly. A quick question, please.
Hi, everyone. How do we design a system, or are we designing a system currently so that we do not breach other planetary boundaries while solving for climate change?
Okay. So 3 questions. Anyone would like to take the agriculture one?
Yeah, I should say something about agriculture, but let me first say something about solar. You bet, massive solar farms, we call them giga solar farms, will be a huge part of the solution, although interestingly, in most of the developments that I've seen the specs for in Australia, it's more wind than solar, although the two are used in tandem to produce renewable energy. On agri, this is a huge issue for us and one that we're tackling. So one part of the solution that we have is that our principal scientific organisation has developed a sort of algae that, if fed to cows, causes them to produce less methane. And yet that's just one part of the solution, but boy, that's a biggie and we've got to work hard on it.
Okay, what about changes while we are trying to deal with climate change? We cross other planetary boundaries. Would anybody like to take that? Alex?
We might well, but we've got so much to deal with the first challenge that I think let's not kind of be put off by the possibilities that come after it, because it's such a big one. Agriculture, anything to do with the politics of farmers in agricultural countries is an absolute, it's very, very difficult. There's where you're going to get to retail politics in a big way.
I think we have simply run out of time. But I would like to thank all our panelists. I think you will all agree that they have done a wonderful job in responding to all our questions. And thank all of you for being here on this cold afternoon to listen to us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to all this truly distinguished panel, as we give them each a token of our affection and gratitude with this scarf. Some of the panel will be outside afterwards. All of the panel will be outside afterwards, I hope, to answer your questions. By that I mean right outside, please. And some will be signing copies of their books, if you wish, at the book booth, which is just outside. So our thanks to all of them, and our special thanks to Business Standard, who presented this session. Thank you, Business Standard.